Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Tax, the show for growth-minded CPAs and real estate pros in tax. I'm TJ Sponsel. In today's episode, we will discuss the R&D tax credit and how it intersects with AI and other technologies. Joining us today for Let's Talk Tax for the first time is Richie Abedin. Richie is a senior consultant within our R&D practice and leads all of our technology-minded clients in that area of the firm. Welcome, Richie.
Yes, thank you, TJ.
Well, Richie, kind of today, kind of the idea behind this episode today was we just, over the years, McGuire Sponsel's, our R&D practices continue to grow. We deal with a lot of different questions from clients because when you look at the technology umbrella, there's a lot that fits under there. Definitely. There's hardware, there's software, there's integration, and now there's AI. And I think sometimes companies and CPAs get fixed on the buzzwords. They get fixed on the buzzwords and says, oh my gosh, I'm doing AI for the first time. I have R&D. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of companies out there, there's other firms out there that pretty much are telling anyone and everyone that if you do something for the first time, that's qualified research. Well, obviously, we know that's not the case. Yeah. And so today's episode, I really wanted to kind of, for the next few minutes, kind of tear apart some different aspects of technology and help our listeners understand maybe what's the good and what's bad regarding technology and the R&D credit. Okay.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Okay, so let's take on the case of AI. Kind of walk us through, when does AI, because AI, there's a lot that goes on in it right now. It's all brand new technology for many people. Kind of walk us through the pitfalls in terms of where AI is not qualified and then areas where AI could be qualified.
Yeah, definitely, TJ. I think one of the most important aspects when talking to a taxpayer is clarifying the difference between automation and artificial intelligence. When you think about AI, you're talking about artificial intelligence where the goal is often unknown. When you're talking about automation, it's definitely a one-off task. It's an objective goal that we're trying to meet. Our taxpayers choose to use these words pretty interchangeably, so it's important for us to clarify in understanding kind of the automation difference and AI. So in the case of automation, we have a lot of clients who are building tools, functionality in the software realm in order for a certain task to be completed. That's very clear. In terms of artificial intelligence, our taxpayers are trying to develop a software that can make decisions on its own, find patterns on its own, and then from there, provide results that are actionable.
So, Richie, sometimes I think when this maybe applies to all technology, just not AI, is that, and obviously I am a layman when it comes to technology, even though I know the credit really well, is that if you're just using off-the-shelf technology, that's not the threshold. If you're using off-the-shelf technology for the first time and training yourself or your team, that's not the standard. The standard for qualified research is that you've actually got to be developing something. You got to be elbows deep, if you will, in the programming of that technology to be able to get into the realm of qualified research. Is that a good way to look at it?
Yes, definitely. With the rise of artificial intelligence, open source artificial intelligence, where individuals can use these tools online in order to specifically generative AI, such as ChatGPT, in order to kind of come up with ideas from the AI experience. It's important to kind of understand, as you're describing, when you're building AI and developing AI, the question of the kind of the variables that you're going to put into that artificial intelligence in order to get the results that you're looking for, that's where the uncertainty lies. On the other end of the spectrum, where you, as you suggested, tools and applications bought off the shelf and being used for automation, these one-off tasks, or even tools and platforms that do artificial intelligence, using those tools is not automatically qualified. The question of the variables that you're going to be inputting into that, there may be technical uncertainty, but often these tools provide very in-depth details, manuals, logs of kind of how their tool works in order for you to utilize it for yourself. And that's where that technical uncertainty kind of drops off, and that's where it would not be qualified.
Another area that we get the technology question is that we see obviously the nature of McGuire Sponsels. We're here to serve our hundreds of alliance partners across the country. One area that we get a call is managed IT providers. is that my client's a managed IT provider. Now, we know, and you know very much, that there's a lot that goes under managed IT provider, okay? But there's also some of those that do their own software development, okay? Is that they may bring in other tools like Salesforce and other platforms and integrate that into a customer's application. Is there any opportunity for those types of businesses in the R&D credit?
Yeah. When you're talking about technical uncertainty, it's often in the realm of capability and methodology. That's usually where you see software development, technical uncertainty. When you're talking about software that you've purchased and you're adapting or customizing, that's an important distinction there. Customizing that software, getting into the code and implementing it for your company, then at that time you can look at the technical uncertainty of appropriate design. How does this fit the needs of our company? This would also be applicable to CRM platforms, any kind of software where you are purchasing it and doing some kind of code development in the application in order to work for your needs. The differentiator there is the configuration versus the customization. When it comes to configuration, the ideology here is that there's modules and features that can be turned on or turned off in order for the client experience to fit to fit the client's needs. The other side of customization is when these new features need to be built, these new modules need to be built in order for the customer to use them, and that's where that would be qualified.
Okay. In addition to all the funded research provisions that we talk about a lot as well.
Correct.
That would layer on top of that. Correct. How about SaaS providers? It feels like we get that question a lot and we have many SaaS providers as clients. Kind of walk us through that in terms of where that would make sense and where it wouldn't make sense.
Definitely. The key thing about SaaS providers developing and trying to claim the R&D tax credit is understanding that when you have a SaaS product, the development never really ends. It's an iterative process where there's a very clear connection between the developer and the client, and it's an ongoing kind of cycle of project development in order to hit and meet the features that the client's needs. On the other end of the spectrum, we have a lot of SaaS taxpayers who will develop an application that's very universal, that's very applicable to all their clients, and then a client of theirs would ask for a very specialized functionality that they don't offer. In those situations, it's very important to understand the contract that the client's client is signing, the taxpayer's client is signing, in order to understand if there is, as you mentioned, the financial risk of the research rights. And that's kind of the key thing when it comes to SaaS providers, is making sure you're reading the contract to understand who has the financial risk, who has the research rights, and is there actual R&D happening.
And if they're using offshore labor versus domestic labor. I mean, that's the thing. How many times we've been on a call with a prospective client, and we have this great call, and they're doing all this very exotic, progressive development work, and then we find out they have all their development teams in India or Romania or something like that. It's just kind of the bubbles burst because offshore development obviously is not includable.
Yeah, definitely. And, there's companies out there that use like sister companies that are international, that are providing them with resources for development. And often those conversations come up in terms of those resources and making sure that we're only accounting for the individuals in the United States and the work that they're doing.
I think one thing also to point out to those companies that are obviously a client or a taxpayer that engages a third party to do their development work. Okay, and we've touched on this economic risk and research rights. It's not only we are trying to include those costs, meaning the cost they're paying their vendor, and they're paying them on some type of a rates times hours basis. It can't be a fixed price or a milestone driven contract. We talked about that before. But it's also, I think, one thing that people gloss over is the time that our clients' employees spend with those third-party developers. Regardless if those third-party developers are offshore or domestic, there's a lot of time incurred on our clients' part in terms of helping navigate concepting, doing the beta testing, working through all the details with those third-party contractors to accomplish their technology goals.
Yes, definitely. One of the biggest aspects of software development is quality assurance. And often these situations where a third party is being contracted out in order to do the development, it comes back in-house. The application, the platform, whatever is being developed comes back in-house to the taxpayer to do quality assurance, to make sure it's meeting all the requirements and specifications that the client needs. And that's key time that needs to be documented for the R&D tax credit, because as they're doing that quality assurance, they're finding those technical hurdles that they may need to overcome, any kind of improvements that need to be done, any bugs that need to be squashed, things of that nature.
Sure. Well, and I think one thing that, and for companies that are not technology companies, but are investing in technology, we come across that a lot of times. And unfortunately, those costs, while they're expensive, not always qualified. When I think of being on the phone with a client and they're saying, hey, we just invested in a brand new ERP system, which obviously gets us to that whole internal use versus external use development. So, can you kind of give us a nice 10,000-foot view of when a company that's not a technology company invests in software in their business, where kind of, if you think of a pinball machine, the flaps, what flap allows it to be includable for an R&D credit, and what is not includable in the credit?
Yeah, this key distinction coming back to this idea of configuration versus customization again. As you're adapting a software, hypothetically, in the situation where an ERP system is purchased, if you're using it as is, there's really no configuration or customization there. It just works, and there's no technical uncertainty, so it wouldn't qualify. Once you get that application and choose and realize that it does not meet the capabilities that you need, if the software offers those configurable options, then it's more about talking to your provider of the software to figure out how to make it work for you. On the other end is when you have to customize it, going to a outside provider, or maybe even hiring the software developer that built the original application in order to do those custom development activities in order to make it work for our client's client, or our taxpayer.
So, Richie, on those situations where a company invests in software, obviously we go back to those rules of external use versus internal use. Because just because you're investing in software and you may have a lot of risk associated with it, there's also another layer of definition there in terms of use of what's qualified and what's not qualified.
In terms of internal use software, there's 3 additional criteria a project must pass in order to be qualified. First one is that it has to be highly innovative. The highly innovative aspect in prior cases, in court cases, the way that's been evaluated or tracked is there has to be a tangible efficiency increase or a tangible time decrease, and that the courts have identified that as highly innovative software. So showing something as simple as it used to take a week to do payroll and now it takes a day, that would be an example of highly innovative. The next criteria is that the project has to have a significant amount of economic risk. And when it comes to significant amount of economic risk, the courts have kind of looked at the aspect of other qualified projects. So if we have a taxpayer who's doing, let's just say, manufacturing and automation, and they have all these automation projects that qualify, and this ERP project, this one little internal use of software makes up less than 10% of the total qualified QREs, then it wouldn't be a significant economic risk. So when it comes to significant economic risk, majority of the time you want to see that the client or the taxpayer doesn't have any other qualified projects except this internal use software, unless you kind of get into that gray area again of kind of managing all the qualified expenditures versus that internal use. And the product can't be off the shelf. And the definition of off the shelf definitely goes back to that idea of highly innovative again. The idea that you can purchase the software and as soon as you purchase it, it works entirely for what you need it to do. When you go into the customization and changing of the product on a code level basis, that's when you kind of get it away from off the shelf. It's no longer off the shelf once you get into the code because it is customized specific for your client's needs or our client's needs.
And when we say internal use, and this is where I think the distinction is important, Richie, is that obviously you just laid out those 3 qualifying criteria for internal use. Now, internal use is just for internal. When I say internal, it's facing only to the company, okay? And so that's why we talk about ERP systems. That's facing oftentimes only into the company. But if you're developing software that is facing to the market, okay, those 3 criteria do not exist. We're going back to the traditional definitions of qualified research. Okay, so if I think of online banking, I think of FedEx trying to track your packages, StubHub trying to buy your next concert tickets. When you're developing software that allows you to the outside world to interact with your business, that's not internal use software, correct?
That's correct. So this distinction was created in 2015, the dual use software aspect of the R&D tax credit. The idea here is, as you mentioned, when you're talking about internal use software, you're talking about administrative functionality, things that you need in order to make the business run on a day-to-day basis. Dual use software was definitely an important distinction that the IRS, the tax code, came up with in 2015, providing some detail or some explanation for these internal use softwares that are external facing, as you're suggesting. So in terms of FedEx package tracking, there is the internal aspect of it where everyone inside of FedEx is making sure that the package is moving from place to place, managing, seeing where it goes, and then providing, account management activities. On the other end, you still have that external side where an individual can get into a portal of some kind to see their package, manage their package, make notes on the delivery aspect or notifications of when the package arrives. And that kind of dual use software, when it comes to that, the tax code says that you do not need those additional three prongs of the internal use software. It is important to make the distinction is that 25% of the project has to be related to those external use functionality before you can ignore or not have to pass those internal use software criteria.
Okay. So, Richie, and obviously all the work that you have done with our clients, and obviously our reach grows and grows every year, thankfully. What are the things, if you look at, obviously AI is relatively new, you look at SaaS, you look at managed IT providers, you look at software developers, you look at integrators, and obviously clients that are investing in some type of dual purpose software. What's one of the biggest myths you see in terms of them understanding the credit and how their investments meet the definitions of qualified research?
Yeah, TJ, one of the biggest aspects that I see in my taxpayers and software clients in specifically is defining research and development. Often with software, unlike manufacturing, architecture, or production, there's no tangible good here. So when it comes to risk, often it's time that we're talking about, an individual's time that they're spending in coding and development. And for a developer, for a coder, a lot of what they do is trial and error on the spot. So as they're kind of building and coding things out, defining things, they can run a test on that specific piece of line of code and see if it works. If it doesn't, then they go back to the drawing board and do that iterative process. Most often, these iterative activities are not being documented as research and development, mainly because the developer is under this aspect of this isn't real R&D because something went wrong, so I didn't really discover anything new. When really you discovered that it was wrong, and that's new information.
Well, I think that's why it's important to have a call with us, and really sit down and understand what your approach to software development, what's the composition of your development team, what are the level of expenses. I think sometimes the other thing is that we're only talking to, it's a good worthy credit, but it's 6 to 8% of the credit costs. And sometimes we'll be talking to a client, closely held business that's investing in software, and $50,000 or $60,000 is a lot of money. We've made those investments over the years at Sponsel. But when you take the credit and you say, okay, well, you paid a third-party cost, that's automatically 65% of the total would be what would be eligible if all of it was includable. And then you take a 6 to 8% credit. It's not just looking at and saying, okay, you have qualified research, but it's also, let's look and see what the numbers generate also, because unfortunately, that's the nature of it as well. And then you pile on currently 174 requirements, which are extremely unfair, I believe, and that's why we've been so active with trying to get this thing repealed. But when you have 174 on top of that with software that can be extremely binding, if you will, to the taxpayer.
Yes. So software capitalization is a big aspect of what we do, just kind of using it as a guide for understanding what projects are qualified. What's interesting about software capitalization is that it's only specific to direct research expenses. So those direct developers who are hands deep doing those day-to-day trial and error coding activities. What is being missed in those opportunities and capitalization is the technical support and the technical supervision. Individuals who are involved in making sure that when there's a technical hurdle, we know all the alternatives, or we can do research on what alternatives are out there to make sure the project keeps moving forward. On the technical support side, you have individuals like quality assurance or even sales individuals who are talking directly to the client to understand what their needs are, what their concerns are, what are the technical issues, and then bring back to the development team.
Rapid fire question time. We like to end our podcast with just a few couple quick questions that hopefully we can address some of the areas that we missed. Cloud computing's costs. Walk us through that. Obviously, those can be serious expenses for development, companies that are investing in development. How does that fit within the code section 41?
Yes. So Section 41 doesn't explicitly talk about cloud computing. When it was written, the idea of cloud computing hadn't existed. Instead, what they do talk about is computer leasing. And computer leasing was presented with this idea. The idea of computer leasing was related to the idea of companies having to rent out a certain amount of time from a university or a bigger business. They do their research on those computers after leasing them out, and then take that research back to their facility in order to finish up their development. As time went on, and we got to the point of personal computers, we got to the point of on-prem servers, and then now to cloud computing. The same criteria that was used to describe computer leasing is applicable to cloud computing. What the important distinction here is when you have cloud computing involved, you have the application that can be hosted on the cloud, and then you can use the cloud for development on that application to be run on the cloud. And the important distinction as we're qualifying expenses is including only the developmental expenses from cloud computing and ignoring the hosting cost, as that is just part of running the application.
Richie, I guess the last question for you is that, we take a lot of pride in the relationship and the duty that we have to our clients and making sure we're giving them good counsel. We also have situations in which we transition clients from other providers, or they maybe calculate themselves. What trapdoor do you obviously, unfortunately, see out there when we talk to a client that's maybe not used McGuire Sponsel in the past? They've used us for the first time, and they've either self-taught themselves the credit or they've relied on their provider. What trapdoor do you kind of find occasionally in those projects?
Most of the time, it relates back to, as I mentioned, the capitalization of software. Often there are other providers out there who would look at this capitalization record and consider that as the only qualified research that a client had, really missing out on those additional expenses of the technical support individuals or the technical supervision individuals. Especially as now we're moving and we're seeing the increased effects of 174. When it comes to qualifying expenses for the credit, a lot more companies, a lot more providers, R&D tax credit providers are being a little bit more conservative in those expenses in order to put their client in the best tax position, which isn't correct.
Well, Richie, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. And the audience, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching us. Catch us on YouTube at Let's Talk Tax Podcast or at McGuireSponsel.com for all show notes and follow up from each episode.